The memo's meaning and importance, the construction of those memos that purposely tortures election finance laws and the legitimate lawful actions of our president. Some Dems, despite the warnings of some of their leaders, crying out for impeachment or indictment of the president after the phony Russia witch hunt found absolutely no evidence of any collusion whatsoever.
Are you in a position to consider discussing impeachment in Congress?
I think we have to be.
I think they might actually seek to indict Donald Trump here.
Even if a sitting president can't be indicted, he's got to know his future looks like it's behind bars.
Legal scholars such as Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz examining the work product and the claims of the Trump-hating special counsel and the efforts to use the radical dim network of left-wing prosecutors in the New York City and state governments, along with the New York U.S. Attorney's Office, to politically persecute and harass President Trump and subvert his administration. Dershowitz saying Mueller failed spectacularly in his effort to take down this president.
The takeaway is that the Mueller has come up with far less than he hoped for. He's not getting cooperation, obviously, from Manafort. I don't think Cohen has anything new. Manafort can't ever be used as a witness because he's lied so much. The same is true of Cohen.
Tonight, we tackle the latest hyper-politicization of the special counsel's Russia investigation. Congressman Matt Gaetz and investigative journalist John Solomon with us. Also tonight, the elitist French president Emmanuel Macron on the verge of a political collapse after yet another weekend of violence and demonstrations by the middle class, working men and women, simply furious over Macron's socialist policies. Globalist elites also dealt another blow in the United Kingdom as Prime Minister Theresa May delayed a vote on her unpopular Brexit deal over concerns it does little to advance the cause of true British independence, which the British people voted for. And that migrant caravan south of our border remains in Mexico. Members of the caravan increasingly desperate, trying to cross illegally into the United States, even shoving children under barriers at the border. Radical Dems, including Chuck Schumer and the incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, offering President Trump nothing to fix the border crisis. In fact, insulting him and those who support a border wall. Our top story tonight, the radical Dems and the left-wing national media on a tirade against the president, offering up constant and ceaseless attacks on his presidency. Joining in on their warrantless assault have been all of their deep state cronies in the intelligence agencies obsessing over imaginary campaign finance allegations and Trump family business dealings. That's right, Trump family business dealings now apparently the pursuit of the so-called special counsel. Friday, that counsel's office released two memos for Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, the sentencing memos, both of them providing no links whatsoever to Russian collusion, didn't accuse the president of any crimes, yet the radical left and the left-wing national media running rampant with their calls for prison time or impeachment, whatever you want.
This criminal must be brought up by the Congress of the United States for impeachment.
When the evidence becomes so clear that you very likely have a criminal sitting in the Oval Office, what is the Congress left to do at that point?
This is not going to end 2 years from now, and this is throughout the rest of his life.
I'm not convinced that Trump is guilty of committing a crime, but it sure seems like individual one is.
In a tweet, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, declared candidate Trump didn't break any law, saying, quote, no collusion, no obstruction, not campaign finance, but payments to settle lawsuits are clearly not a proper campaign contribution or expenditure. A number of congressional Republicans also stepping out in support of the president to quash the Dems' calls for indictments.
Is this a campaign finance violation, which would obviously, I don't think, be anywhere near impeachable?
I can't imagine basing any kind of prosecution on the word of Mr. Cohen.
We've investigated this for a long period of time. Both sides have come up with nothing in the process. I think we should put the American people first.
Meanwhile, over the weekend, gaps in the Russia witch hunt came into sharper focus. That when former FBI Director James Comey's closed-door testimony was released, the transcript revealing that after 10 months of FBI investigation and intelligence from a surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page, Russian collusion was unproved when Special Counsel Mueller was appointed in May last year. Despite all of that, the only way it seems to stop all of this madness and satisfy the Dems would be to throw our borders wide open, to outsource millions more of our jobs to cheap foreign labor markets, and hold perhaps a surrender ceremony in the South Lawn of the White House in which the president could turn over power to the left's cohorts on Wall Street, the Koch brothers, the Business Roundtable, and the Chamber of Commerce. Nothing less, it seems, would satisfy them, so they will remain unsatisfied. Joining us tonight, John Solomon, opinion contributor for The Hill. John, award-winning investigative journalist. He's worked over the last 3 decades at publications including The Washington Post, The Associated Press, The Washington Times, and, of course, The Hill. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, Lou.
Appreciate you being here. Let's turn first to just the level of rhetoric and acidic propaganda. The Dems are on a full-blown propaganda blitz. What do you make of it?
Well, I think they're a little bit ahead of the facts, right? We don't have all the facts yet, but let's take into account some of the things that we do know. When we started this investigation, we were in a different football stadium, right? There was a stadium and the goal line was going to be, was there collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? And we're not even playing in that stadium now. We're in some campaign finance stadium 3 or 4 streets down. And so I think that's the first thing, that so far there's still no collusion. That was the primary reason we had Bob Mueller's investigation. I think secondly, prosecutors have tried a case like this once before, and they failed miserably. They did this against John Edwards. They claimed he took some donor money and then used it to pay off or to hide an affair. And he was acquitted on one charge and the jury deadlocked on the other. And the overwhelming message from the jurors was they considered it a private matter, just like what President Trump said this morning. These payments were a private transaction. So I think we have to take all that into account, take a deep breath, step back, and wait for the rest of the facts before we pass judgment.
You and I both know that the Dems are not passing judgment. They're carrying out a propaganda campaign, a vicious, baseless political attack on a sitting president, and their intent is to subvert his presidency and his administration, right?
Well, keep in mind that the entire Russia investigation began with a Democratic campaign. Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, paying for the Steele dossier and then walking it into the FBI. And if we're going to talk about campaign finance violations, right, this is one of the things that's at issue with Trump and the payments. Let's take a look at the one violation we know for sure occurred. The Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, did not properly identify the payments to Fusion GPS. They hid them. They disguised them as legal payments when they were political opposition research. Where is that prosecution? Where's the media's interest even in those facts? You don't hear it ever talked about.
It would, it seems, be worthy of a footnote somewhere in the national left-wing media that not only that, but that President Obama's campaign had to pay a $375,000 fine for violating precisely the same laws that are repaired to by the hysterical left in this country. And they don't do that. And secondly, there was no discussion then, nor should there be now, of prison sentencing. It is a matter of restitution in precedent and in point of fact. This is, as the president claimed and as you pointed out, a private matter. Let's turn to one part of that, though, and that was the decision by Rosenstein to listen to Senator Mark Warner when he called for a special counsel. At that point, surely he knew what FBI director, fired FBI director in May of 2017, also knew and had known since October. And that is that dossier, authored by Christopher Steele, the former MI6 agent, was in fact a paid-for product from the left, and millions of dollars had changed hands to support it. Yet he still went ahead, knowing that it's a Democrat calling for the special counsel, it's a democratically funded document, and that in point of fact, he surely had to be able, given his immense intellect and gifts, that they had betrayed the FISA court system by using such a document as a foundation for warrants against a sitting president.
You know, if you read most of the papers, not The Hill, though, good, The Hill had this, but most of the papers over the weekend made not a mention of what I thought was a very important event. James Comey couldn't remember a lot during his testimony on Friday, but the one thing he did remember was that at the moment they used the Steele dossier to submit for a FISA application, he knew it was unverified, even though the law says you can't use unverified evidence before a FISA court. That was such a major omission, but you couldn't find it anywhere in the newspapers this weekend, which I think goes to that double standard that everybody complains about in the media today. Yeah. But let's take a look at Rosenstein for 1 second.
Let me interject just for a moment before you do that and point out the time frame we're talking about. That James Comey acknowledged in that testimony, as we saw in the transcript, as you reported in the Hill, that he knew in early October, that is before the end of that month, had moved ahead. He knew all that there was to know about that dossier, which was that's important, and that is that it was unverified and likely unverifiable. And you were about to say about Rod Rosenstein.
Well, remember when Rod Rosenstein approves the special prosecutor, he expands the case beyond Russia to the possibility that the President of the United States engaged in obstruction by asking James Comey to go easy on Mike Flynn. Well, let's take a look at this, and let's take a look at something Barack Obama did a few years earlier. A few years earlier, during the Clinton email investigation, Barack Obama made a statement that he didn't think Hillary Clinton had committed any crimes, had no intent. This is before the FBI made its determination. No one was crying obstruction then, but the same Justice Department suddenly finds in an almost identical circumstance, an offhand remark, the evidence of obstruction. When people look at this, you know, I hear lots of complaints. I see a double standard when it comes to the Clintons and Obama and Trump, and I think these sort of anecdotes build into that impression that people have.
It's an impression, but the facts are that the top 7 people in the FBI have moved on and were moved on as a result of their complicity in acts of outright political corruption, and in several instances specifically in an attempt to subvert this presidency, yet not one of them right now is facing criminal charges. There has been a criminal referral, but not criminal charges.
That's right, and the wheels of justice seem to be turning slow on that front.
Well, there's also another way of saying that, is that the Dems have been successful against some somewhat either naive or recalcitrant Republicans, and particularly the leadership of the House, of slow rolling the entire process and running out the clock, and only weeks in which to do so before they have control of the House.
Yeah, that's a big concern that Republicans particularly have in the House. But these investigations are going to live on. I'm pretty certain that Senate Judiciary, Senate Finance, and the Inspector General of the Justice Department are still going to dig into the wrongdoing that's inherent in the FBI's conduct in this case. And that's where we need to keep our reporting focused on.
John Solomon, we appreciate you focusing your reporting. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you.
You too.
Up next, more on the radical Dems' efforts to subvert this president in any way they can, in ways we've never seen before. Calling for everything from indictments to impeachment. Who knows what's next?
There's a very real prospect that on the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him, that he may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
The walls are closing in on Donald Trump. I happen to believe the president could be indicted.
We certainly have moved into a new phase. The president has now stepped into the same territory that ultimately led to President Nixon resigning.
I think what these indictments and filings show is that the president was at the center of a massive fraud, several massive frauds against the American people.
What you've just heard from those eminent radical Dems would be categorized as pure hogwash. When we come back, we'll take it all up with Congressman Matt Gaetz. Stay with us. The Mueller witch hunt has failed to find anything to link President Trump with Russia. The deep state is, well, their partisan agenda, their ideological agenda against this president is in full view now. And listen, just listen to what fired former FBI Director James Comey had to say over the weekend.
All of us should use every breath we have to make sure that the lying stops. on January 20th, 2021. Look, I understand the Democrats have important debates to have about who their candidate should be. They have to win.
Yeah.
They have to win.
That's such an impassioned plea. And then there's former CIA Director John Brennan. He tweeted in part, but with not quite such phony earnestness, quote, "I am relieved that you will never have the opportunity to run for public office again." We presume he was talking about the president. Just what public office did Brennan think the president should run for after 8 years sitting in the Oval Office? Extraordinary, the way the man can't quite capture the way the man thinks. Joining us tonight is Congressman Matt Gaetz, member of the House Judiciary and Armed Services Committees. It's great to have you with us. Let me start out with Comey and this late effort to subpoena him, to bring him in for testimony. I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of what the Judiciary Committee has done, to be straightforward about it. But at least you're doing something here now, your committee. You've been doing much throughout. But I have to say, the fact that no one apparently asked Comey what he realized about that FISA warrant, knowing that the Democrats had paid for it. I mean, that's just on its face unlawful.
John Ratcliffe asked a series of questions that I think would have revealed more information about FISA abuses. James Comey just wouldn't answer them because he had very selective amnesia. Whenever we tried to understand who was in the room, what views were being discussed, who could corroborate or refute his version of events, he was always very hazy on those details. But if there was any possibility to put the president in a bad light, Jim Comey definitely took those shots. And you see that he's going to continue to do it on the campaign trail, Lou. And I think this highlights the multi-pronged war that President Trump is in right now against the establishment, against the Democrats, against the deep state and their allies like Jim Comey. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that President Trump select Mark Meadows to be chief of staff, because Mark's a guy who understands the media, understands the politics, and there is no person President Trump could consider that knows the facts better than Mark Meadows, so that we mount the defense that we should have been mounting during the 115th Congress.
Well, as your electoral record demonstrates clearly and boldly, you certainly have not lost a step in your capacity as a campaigner. And I think that would be an understatement. Do you think Mark would take the job if offered?
I do. I think Mark is a patriot, and he shares the frustration that you do, and that so many, hundreds of thousands, a million viewers you have every night that are just wondering why not more is happening to unlock the potential of President Trump's agenda. We've got one of us in the White House, a disruptor, someone who believes in this country and will take on the special interests.
Well, let me ask a
now
question.
He needs someone like Mark Meadows who can execute on that vision, and we could see even better results for the American people.
Yeah, I think what we want is somebody who can execute for the president's vision day in and day out. But what I would like to have is somebody, a lot of folks actually in that White House, who stand up and defend this president every damn day. I would also like to have somebody in the Republican Party leadership, whether it's the House or the Senate, standing up and just pointedly and passionately pointing out that what the Dems are doing is nothing more than a propaganda blitz, and it's pure rank bull. And I don't hear Mitch McConnell saying that. I don't hear Paul Ryan saying it. The American people are just about done with the Republican Party if they can't find the passion to stand up for the man who is representing the interest of working men and women, the American middle class. And the Republican Party seems to be representing nothing other than the Koch brothers, Wall Street, the Chamber of Commerce. Where the hell are the Republican leaders?
Well, we need more warriors here in the Congress that will pick up the baton in that respect. And, if you look at what the president's been able to do in the absence of tremendous congressional support, it really could get you excited about what it would mean if we would actually have his back. But if you had Mark in there, you would actually operationalize the agenda. It wouldn't be just what we're talking about. There would be more, I think, occurring in the country to validate the boldness of this president. But if we don't have somebody in that role who understands understands how the opposition fights, then I think we'll be behind the 8 ball. 54% of Americans, Lou, believe that this Russia investigation is politically motivated. So we've got the wind at our back to go make our...
It's outrageous. It's an affront against every American value. And who the hell is standing up in your entire leadership team? I'm not talking about you and Jordan and Meadows and Biggs. I'm talking about your leadership. Who among them has stood up and said this is nonsense, it's outrageous, it's an affront against the American people and the millions of Americans who voted for this president and our system of justice to pursue prosecution, political persecution against this president?
I will give Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy credit for joining us in our call for a second special counsel to go after the people who've broken the law.
Can I be clear?
That's something. Paul Ryan didn't do that. But Scalise and McCarthy
but
did.
it is not what I would call a passionate defense of this president. It was,
no, that's what you see me offer.
When
you
the Republicans get tired of writing letters and start to do things in that leadership, they may have a chance of recapturing the House. But until then, I don't think there's a chance in hell. What do you think?
Well, you're going to see the Democrats do real oversight. They're not going to have the low-energy oversight we had, and then we'll have to explain to our constituents why we couldn't get the truth about FISA abuses, but the Democrats are going to do everything they can to frustrate, disrupt, and distract President Trump. So we've got to be focused on our job in the minority, which is laying out the defense of the president against a corrupt, illegal, unfounded investigation that, by the way, to bring it back to Comey, even Comey admitted when he was fired there was no evidence of collusion. Even Lisa Page, who hated Trump, said there was nothing there.
Congressman, I have the utmost respect for you. I like you a lot. But I got to tell you, in addition to all of those things, you're going to have to bring a political fist right across the nose of the left if you're going to have any impact in defending this president. This is going to be a street fight, and trust
well, then let's get the best street fighter in Congress at the president's side. That's Mark Meadows, and I think that's ultimately the message I wanted to deliver. We have the tools to win. Let's go use them. Let's get on the field, and let's do everything we can for this president, this agenda, and this great country.
Right on. And Congressman, your message, when delivered 3 times, even I absorb. Thank you very much. Good to have you with us. Matt Gaetz.
Thank you, Lou.
Up next, President Trump searches for a new chief of staff to help him further his America First agenda. Gina Loud and Michael Goodwin will weigh in on that and more. Do they agree with Matt Gaetz? We'll find out when we continue. Stay with us. Joining me now, Gina Loudon, political analyst, member of the President's Media Advisory Board, and the author of Mad Politics, which we recommend to you highly. Also with us, New York Post columnist, Fox Business contributor, Michael Goodwin. Good to see you, and you're welcome, Gina. Let's start out with the president as the focal point of this left-wing propaganda blitz. They have taken this thing to a new level, they being the radical Dems and the left. Where is the Republican leadership, as I asked Matt Gaetz, who is one of the president's great defenders and one of his great advocates?
That's the question that so many of us have been asking for so long, Lou, and I would submit that that's part of the reason Republicans elected this president. They were tired of a Republican establishment that just continued to cower every time another accusation was thrown at them and just continued to take a backseat while the Democrats, I always say this, while the Democrats circle wagons, Republicans tend to circle fire. I hope that we can be visionary and we can change that for the election in 2020 because we're going to have to.
Yeah, I hope that that the Republican Party can be a party of street fighters and get down just as dirty as the Democrats. I mean, we were watching, what was it, 40 races almost just thrown away in the weeks after the election, not right. It was the voting continued. It's like Stalin said, you go ahead and vote. I'll do the counting.
Right. Yeah.
Michael, let's turn to this issue of the president being the focal point now of this attack, because the radical Dems didn't get what they wanted from the special counsel. Now they're manufacturing this propaganda and nonsense. What should the president, what should the Republicans be doing about it? And where are Mitch McConnell, his leadership team, and the Speaker of the House and his.
Well, also you've got a multiplication of the prosecutors now. This focus now of the Southern District here in New York, which took the Cohen matter. And I should note that after President Trump appointed someone to be the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, that person was forced to recuse himself by Rod Rosenstein. Mm-hmm. So really what you have is you have the Democrats.
Who is the only man who does not recuse.
That's right. So what you have is you have the Democratic holdovers who are running this case, and they clearly, when you read their sentencing memo on Cohen with campaign finance, they make it sound like the holy grail of government, that any well, they, you know.
Well, Obama, for example, would never have violated campaign finance laws.
Oh, no.
Well, did he really?
He got off with a fine, right?
Yeah, $375,000.
So, but I think that the tone.
Very quietly,
yes,
snuck it in.
And the tone of that speech making in that sentencing memo is all about a partisan tone.
Where is the border wall, Gina, and why is this president reluctant? And why is the Republican leadership reluctant to fund a lousy $5 billion for a $25 billion wall? And the Dems are so cocky about it all. They're insulting the president with a $1.5 billion offer, so long as, just like Paul Ryan did, that money doesn't go to build a wall.
Well, the Democrats might want to wake up, and it wouldn't hurt the Republicans to wake up to the fact as well that it is this precise issue that elected this president. Americans are sick and tired of crime being committed on them, and this is, let's never forget, namely, the crime impacts the legal immigrant communities in the United States, and the people are not going to sit still for this. So both Republicans and Democrats better wake up to this. But here's the fact, Lou. The Democrats have really a mental block to this because they've realized Americans won't vote for them. They're desperate to import voters, and that's why they won't agree to anything.
Michael, the wall with that is the shutdown come 21 December. Right. The president, should he shut down the government if they don't deliver the wall?
Look,
and by the way, I'd rather he insist on $25 billion. If you're going to shut down the government, get $25 billion and tell them to go to hell.
You know, Lou, if you dropped in from outer space and you looked at the structure of our government, you would say that, gee, the Democrats must control Congress. They have played a very weak hand, just as the Republicans have misplayed a strong hand. Yes.
Shut it down.
Yeah, look, at some point, the wall has to matter.
It absolutely does, particularly since it's the foundation of this presidency and his campaign. Gina Loud, Michael Goodwin, thank you both for being here. It's going to be an interesting, well, remainder of this year and next year. Up next, Paul Manafort back in court. We'll tell you what happened. Stay with us. Another wild day on Wall Street, and indeed 4 straight sessions, 600-point moves. Stocks today closing higher after another volatile session. The Dow erasing a 500-point decline, finishing the session up 34 points. The S&P up 5, the Nasdaq gaining 51. Volume on the big board, 4.1 billion shares. Crude oil down more than 3%, back to $51 a barrel. Gold relatively flat. Silver down 0.5%. Copper down over 1%. A Chinese court ruling that Apple will no longer be allowed to sell older iPhone models in China after the court found Apple infringed on 2 patents held by Qualcomm. Apple says it's appealing. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Joining me now, Kimberly Strassel, member of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal for the last 13 years, and she writes the weekly Potomac Watch political column. Kimberly, great to have you with us. Let's
Hi, Lou.
How you doing? I just we got to start with, if we may, this outright propaganda blitz being launched by taking an escalating move by the Dems against this president. Your thoughts?
Well, I think we saw that last week in an alarming way in terms of some of these court documents that were filed, in terms of the president and supposedly Russian collusion, conspiracy, whatever. Everyone breathlessly in the media speculated that this was going to be a whole new round of Mueller laying out evidence, and there was no there. But you wouldn't know it listening to what they're talking about. And in addition, all the Democrats saying they're going to shut down any investigation into the clear examples of violations that went on during the 2016 election by the FBI, but they are going to launch a fusillade of new investigations into Trump. So this is an all-out war against this presidency.
And talking with congressmen, senators, whomever, Republicans, I mean, they act like this is just another walk in the park, that it's just the Democrats attacking the president. That's fine. They won't stand up and defend him. They won't call for the end of the special counsel. They will not decry the ludicrous and obscene assault by the left and the radical Dems against this president. I really believe we may be seeing the unwinding of the Republican Party itself because of the conflicted leadership teams in both the House and the Senate. Your thoughts?
Well, you do make a very good point, Lou, that this is not politics as usual. And I keep trying to point that out when I talk about the FBI, okay? Just from the broadest level, you have to step back and remember, this was a government agency, a law enforcement agency with extraordinary powers investigating a presidential campaign on the basis of information it received from the rival presidential campaign. That is, in a sense, essentially training government on your political enemies. And that's a very worrisome thing, which is why we need these probes in the House, which is why they have to continue in the Senate. And it's why we ultimately need the president to release and disclose and make transparent all of these documents so that the American public can see the degree to which politics has become weaponized.
The degree to which it's become weaponized, we have the acknowledgement, the admission by fired FBI Director James Comey that he knew the dossier was politically, democratically inspired by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Yet he proceeded to sign 3 FISA documents based on that very document. It also means that Rod Rosenstein, 8 months later, was calling for a special counsel because of a Democratic senator, Mark Warner, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, the ranking member, and he had to know that the very same thing that the FBI director knew, that was an unverified dossier that was used for at least 3 FISA warrants.
Well, and it's extraordinary, Lou, if you go back and you look at the Comey transcript from the questioning he had this last week, and they get to that part. He acknowledges that he knew that it came from the other side. And then the degree to which he spends time suggesting that that doesn't matter, that the FISA court didn't really need that information, that it was irrelevant, his desire to make it sound as though Republicans were somehow behind the dossier. He continued to spout that misdirection, that somehow it was Republicans who paid for the dossier. We know that that is not the case. But, you know, for a guy who couldn't seem to remember hardly any important details when put under questioning, he had his talking points refined to golden. And all of those things he just kept saying again and again. It's misdirection. He knows that it wasn't appropriate.
Kim Strassel, always good to talk with you. We thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. The question is, are you disgusted by the Republican Party's failure to energetically defend the President of the United States against the scurrilous and duplicitous accusations of the radical Dems? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Up next, those caravan migrants resorting to Socialist French President Emmanuel Macron folding to pressure from those violent demonstrations and rioting in Paris. Macron addressing the French nation, saying, quote, "I take my share of responsibility for the anger gripping France," as he well should. He offered tax cuts instead of his tax increases, a minimum wage increase, and tighter control over government spending. In the UK, Prime Minister Theresa May also reversing herself again, calling off a vote on her own Brexit deal, admitting that the negotiation that led to that deal would be rejected by a significant margin if Parliament were to consider it. She means she would be defeated. May now setting a January 21st deadline for the Brexit vote. Interesting in all of this in the UK, the efforts many suspect on the part of Theresa May step to actually undercut the popular referendum that supported Britain's withdrawal from the UK. Is this another effort to thwart the will of the UK population? Well, we'll find out. Desperation on our southern border is a caravan of migrants pushing, one of them pushing an 8-month-old boy under the fence. You can see here the boy feeding the baby before passing him to his girlfriend on this side of the border. This, as radical Dems Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer insult the president, offering only $1.3 billion for so-called border security, nothing for a wall, and it's far short of the president's $5 billion, far short of the $25 billion necessary to build a wall. Joining us now, the Daily Caller's editorial director, Vince Coglianese. Vince, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Lou.
And let's start with the wall. Should the president, in your judgment, shut down the government if he does not get his funding for his wall?
Yes, now's the best possible time for it, actually. Now's the last chance with a Republican control of both the House and the United States Senate for the president to get anywhere near actually getting the funding necessary to build this wall. Also, it's the furthest from the 2020 election, so whatever political damage might come from a government shutdown fight is put off from there. But he was elected with a mandate, which was build a wall. It was chanted at every rally he gave. And I think the president needs to remember that as he goes into this budget fight, because patience is running thin. I mean, think about March, September, every spending fight the president's had this year, he said, man, I'm really disappointed I didn't get that wall. But the next spending fight, it's not going to happen again. Prove it now.
Yeah, it is, as you say, this is his signature promise within that amazing campaign. The American people are depending upon him. And by the way, it's also very clear that the establishment that he campaigned against, represented in the leadership of both parties, means to stop that wall come hell or high water. I personally, Vince, would like to see him demand $25 billion, because that's the cost of building the whole thing. Just up the ante and watch Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan, be beside themselves as a result, be an apoplectic fit over it. Let me turn very quickly to the other issue the president campaigned so hard on and is fighting so hard. This president is the only international leader to stand up and say we need an international system of balanced trade for the support of our global economy and to restore it to growth. And not a single leader is standing with this president, leader of a major country. And indeed, this country is watching the Chinese work through our business community, Wall Street, the Chamber, the Business Roundtable, to actually lobby against the president. Your thoughts?
Well, for anyone who preaches free trade in the United States, you got to get there by being forceful with China. China's been taking advantage of our capacity to be forgiving in every single conversation we've had with them for decades. The U.S. policy has essentially been roll over, play dead, and hope the Chinese eventually are a free trade country. That's not what's happening, and it's not what's happened. So I think President Trump has come at this with the right attitude, which is if you're going to get China to behave, you've got to punish them into doing it. They're stealing intellectual property. They're forcing technology transfers. They're never playing fair on the stage when it comes to free trade. So now the president's saying, you want to get to free trade? Start behaving, and then we're in a free trade system. It's the right attitude to have. And I haven't heard from a single free trader, somebody who advocates for this, what better options we have other than to levy punishments against a country that's failing on its end of the bargain.
And be a debtor nation in perpetuity to squander our wealth, as the president points out. Just think, Vance, without this president in the Oval Office, we would have had either one of the 17 Republicans he crushed or Hillary Clinton, none of whom would find it odd to say, well, would you pretty please quit stealing hundreds of billions of dollars in IP and technology from us? Would you pretty please quit running up trillions of deficits in this country that cut into our economic growth? Pretty please, would you do that? I mean, it's
well, you have no choice. It's the same thing with North Korea. Somebody has to have a backbone and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to stomach this any longer. And that's what President Trump's doing here. Now, let's see. In the end, maybe it doesn't pay off, but at least he tried.
It better pay off, because
now President Xi is working with him.
It better pay off, because unless it does, we don't have a country. Vince Coglianese, great to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Up next, demonstrations erupt and riots across Europe in protest of socialist and globalist elite agendas. Much more on that when we continue. Look at the European Union. We'll be right back.